Good morning. I don't know if you all know this, but Carla is legally blind without her contacts. She has contacts, or at least an inch thick. No, they're really thick. But also, she wears glasses. She can see, but they're literally, they're really big. If you're wondering, I don't know, it's like 11,500 or something like that. 2,500 I think is what it is. Instead of 2020, it's 2,500. So she can see at 20 feet what you can see at 500 feet is what that means. And so it's interesting in our household because there's times when you're going to be wondering why I'm talking about this, but especially when we first got married, there were some little incidents that came up here and there because she couldn't see, and I forgot that she couldn't see. And so one time I was working late and came in, and I was just going to be polite, and she was asleep. I was going to be polite and go in and just get ready for bed and go to bed, not wake her up. Well, I walked in the front door. I walked in the bedroom door, and she sat up. I thought, okay, well, she sees me. It's no big deal. I didn't think anything of it, and she started screaming because she saw a figure in the door, had no idea who it was, and she let out a yelp and scream, and then I'm like, well, okay, she just woke up, so it's okay. She figured it out now. And then she started screaming more, and I was like, what is going on here? And I said, what are you doing? She said, oh, it's you. She had no idea it was me, and I had no idea she couldn't tell it was me, okay? She also loves to sit down at Christmas time and look at the Christmas tree. She takes her contacts out and just stares at the Christmas tree because it's just a big blur with things that glow. And I've used her glasses to see what she kind of sees. It's interesting and fascinating. Why would I be talking about that? Because we go through life sometimes with that kind of eyesight. Everything is here. For her to read, she literally is an inch or less from her face. That's how she can read without glasses. She can see anything without glasses. And we get that way spiritually. And when you are that way physically, there are a lot of conditions and things that you may not realize are coming towards you, dangers and struggles and trials that you're facing and problems you're about to walk into that you have no idea that are there. And if you're that way spiritually, it's even worse because you can't see anything beyond right now. And that's how we tend to live. We live for right now, for today. And I'm thankful we have a God who understands us enough and loves us enough to teach us about death and to even teach us about what happens after death, because this broadens our perspective. It forces us, if we're honest with ourselves, it forces us to get out of our own heads, get out of our own little bitty, I'm living for today, and start thinking about tomorrow and the next day, and maybe even start thinking about other people besides ourselves. It's challenging, but that's exactly what we should be doing as Christians. So what happens after we die? That was actually brought up as a question to me, a request from Nana Joe several months ago, and she probably thought I forgot. To be honest, I did for a little while. So, by the way, if you have any things that you would like me to cover and you've asked me to cover them, I've probably forgotten, so come tell me again. If not, if you want something for me to preach about, let me know. I'm open to requests. It doesn't mean I'm going to do it next Sunday, but I'll put you in the rotation. How about that? So when we talk about death and what happens after we die, there are a lot of things that we don't know. There's a veil. I've never been on the other side of that and come back to tell you. There have been people who have, in the past, in history, who have died and been raised from the dead, but they didn't say anything about it. It's pretty amazing how that, like Lazarus, for example, was dead for 4 days, and he came back, but he evidently never said anything, or if he did say anything, it was no one ever thought to write down what he saw. We even have a passage from Paul in 2 Corinthians talking about someone, we assume it's probably Paul, who went up into the third heavens. He didn't even know if he was in the body or out of the body, but he said, the Lord knows. But he wasn't even allowed to say the things that he saw. So there is certainly a veil. It's intentional that we don't know some things, but we do know some things because Jesus in the Bible revealed them to us. We're going to talk about that a little bit this morning. So I don't have all the answers. I do know that we serve a God who has all the answers, who knows exactly what's going on, and we can trust him, and that really is the point. If you get nothing out of the lesson today, we need to recognize that when we face the afterlife and we grapple with what we face when we die, it should cause us to change our present life. If it doesn't, we're not really being honest with ourselves. There's a lot of reasons, perhaps, why we don't know much about heaven. There's a whole lot of reasons, maybe, why we don't know much about hell or what happens exactly after we die. But the number one reason we need to be aware of is that we need to focus on now based upon what we know for the future. It should change us. It should affect how we live today. So look in Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 15. This is going to be kind of the basis for this. We're not going to spend all of our time here. Anytime you're going to get a lesson out of the book of Revelation, it's going to be difficult because there's so much symbolism. It was written in symbols. And we're going to be looking at other passages to help us understand this a little bit better. And that's what you do. You never interpret the rest of the Bible based on the book of Revelation. You interpret the book of Revelation based on the rest of the Bible. So Revelation chapter 20, starting in verses 11 through 15, we have this great white throne that's set up. It says, I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. Obviously talking about a reference to the end of time, the day of judgment that's coming. But if you also see in verse 13, we have a little more information about what happened. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them. So this is not a question of, it's not about the people who were alive at the time that this is occurring. This is everyone who has ever lived, and it's illustrated by that in verse 13. The sea gave up the dead, death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. There are a lot of questions that come up from this, if we think about it. And like I said, we don't know them all, but we will look at some of the things. I want you to notice verse 14, where it says, Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Now, if you have the King James Version, and I'm not saying anything evil about the King James Version. It's a good version, good translation. But it's going to say hell. It says death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. And that's a source of confusion for a lot of people. It's like, how can hell be thrown into hell? That's just a misfortunate translation. Unfortunately, when they translated the word Hades and Gehenna, several words that are used to describe the afterlife and things there, they simply threw the word hell on it as an all-encompassing term. But the word, while it might have used to been, I'm not positive, but it might have used to been a more generic word, it's become more in English a word specific for hell itself, with all the fire and the brimstone, all the things that are going on in that category. So we have to keep that in mind when we're reading that in our modern times. More modern translations will actually have the word Hades. So we're going to ask, what in the world is Hades? That is the realm of the dead, and we're going to see that. And it's unfortunate that's translated hell because there are several passages that talk about Hades, and instead of saying Hades, the King James says hell. This has caused a lot of confusion. So we're going to look at, hopefully settle all that this morning. But what is Hades? This is what we're going to look at. Look over in Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. We're going to get a glimpse of what Hades is and what it's about. Luke chapter 16, 19 through 31 is the parable, or it could be the real-life experience of a man named Lazarus. I don't know which one it is. It's usually generally accepted as a parable, so that's what I'm going to call it for right now. In chapter 16, verses 19 through 31, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is what he was saying there. There was a man who was rich, who had everything going for him. He had all the luxury that he could afford, that could be afforded to humans. He was a man of wealth and leisure. And outside of his door, and sometimes walking around bumming food inside his house, was a man named Lazarus, who was a man full of sores, who was a man who was very pathetic. He couldn't take care of himself. He needed some help. And so the implications here of the story are that Lazarus didn't really receive much help, and the rich man wasn't willing to give him much help. But in the course of time, they both died. And the rich man was buried. He was laid into a grave, and Lazarus was actually taken, his soul was taken by angels to the bosom of Abraham. We discussed that before too. The bosom of Abraham simply is it's a figure of speech, meaning that he's in a place of fellowship. The Old Testament refers to this, that when people died, it says they went to be with their people. That's a way of looking at that. So this is a situation, and we're going to see that it's temporary, because this is what we call the Hadean realm. We know it's temporary because of Revelation 21 that says death and Hades would be thrown into hell. So there is an end to Hades at some point. It also says that Hades would give up all the dead that is in it, and so we'd be given those up and for the final judgment. So this is a temporary place. Keep that in mind. And there's more here than simply Jesus discussing the afterlife. That's really not his point at all. He's using the afterlife to illustrate a point that they needed to be ready, that they needed to look at the situation that they were in and judge Jesus and listen to his words correctly so that they can learn how to be the people that God wanted them to be. And so here he says, and this section here, that in verse 22, it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angel to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried, and being in torments in Hades, lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. Okay, so now we see that, first of all, we see that the Hadean realm is a place of torments, because that's where this man is. It says, being in torments in Hades. So being in torments here is, where is he at? He's not in hell yet. He's in Hades. He's in the realm of the dead. He's in torments. But also, look, we also have the other side of this, where he said, being in torments, in verse 22, so it was the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. So we also have another side of this. Abraham's bosom is not a place of torments. It's something different, but it is after death. This also fits within the realm of what we call Hades. Both of these places are Hades. One is not Hades and one in the other blessings. One is not Hades and one the bosom of Abraham. It's not Hades and paradise. It's Hades, and that's divided into two parts. We have torments and we have the bosom of Abraham. Now, let me show you that, just so you don't have to take my word for it. Look what we have here in, where did the passages go? Why is it not showing up? Can you select those back there and press the button for me, because this is not working. It's skipping over like 3 or 4. Go back to the previous slide. There's some verses there on the left side. Can you see them? I love technology. Okay, so let me back it up, if it'll let me. We have the bosom of Abraham. I have the verses. They're there. I promise you. I'll get to you later. But, well, that took care of that. So what we have here is a situation where, remember when Jesus was on the cross? Remember here we go. Luke chapter 25 and verse 45. Luke chapter 25, verse 45. How did I get this wrong so bad? It's at 23. Okay, see, I can't see either. Luke chapter 23, thank you, verse 45. Verse 44 says, about the 6th hour, and there was darkness all over the earth until the 9th hour, and the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. Jesus had cried out with a loud voice and said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Still not the right passage. 43, killer font. Thank you. Jesus said to him, assuredly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. There it is. Plain as day. Jesus, speaking to a man who was about to die, said, today you will be with me in paradise. There are people that believe that Jesus went to hell, but he actually went to paradise. Paradise is the place that Jesus was going to be. This man who Jesus forgave was also going to be in paradise, which is exactly where Jesus was going to be because he said he was going to be. And by the way, he was there until his resurrection when he came back out of paradise. But I want you to look in Acts chapter 2 and verse 27 because this gives us insight into the fact that this is actually Hades. In chapter 2 and verse 27, this is a prophecy that was given by David about Jesus. And it says, you will not leave my soul in Hades, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. This is talking about the resurrection of Jesus. He says, you won't leave my soul in Hades. You won't leave my soul in death. But you will raise me back up again. So Jesus said he was going to be in paradise, and David said he's going to be in Hades. The reason that's the case is because he's in both at the same time. Hades is both torments and paradise. Another way of looking at paradise then would be calling it the bosom of Abraham. Those are parallel terms. So when we die, we have a choice, or the choices we made through life will determine whether or not we are in torments or we're in the bosom of Abraham or in paradise. And that man who went there with Jesus that day is still there because the dead has not given up the dead to be judged. Hades has not given up the dead to be judged. That's coming at the end of time. So the people who have entered those places, they're still there. And we're waiting for that time in Revelation chapter 21 when Hades and death will give up the dead, and then the judgment will come, and then they'll be put into either heaven or hell. So this is a place that is temporary, that is divided into two parts. And if we look back in Luke chapter 16, it said that there is a gulf here in verse 26. Between all this, besides all this, between us and you, between Abraham and Lazarus, and you being the rich man who is in torments, he says, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. So there is a great gulf fixed. Now, if you see on the picture, that great gulf is shown by that white stripe. There on one side, we have torments. Those people who are in torments can't do anything to cross over to paradise. And those people in paradise, in the bosom of Abraham, even if they wanted to, couldn't go to torments. And of course, this was because the rich man was asking that Lazarus would come and just put a drop of water on his tongue because he was in torment in the flames in Hades. This is the basics of what God has waiting for us when we die. There are a lot of questions, a lot of things we don't know, but there are some things that we can still consider. Why are we held in some place? That's a legitimate question, and it is one that the Bible addresses. Look with me in Matthew chapter 15. I'm going to make sure I actually see that the right way. 13. See? Chapter 13, verses 24 through 30. I can see it there. It's a lot better. All right. Matthew chapter 13, verses 24. It says, another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while the men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. The servant said to him, do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, no, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let them both grow until the harvest. And at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. This is a representation of what's going to happen at the end of time. At the great resurrection, we're going to be divided at that point. Matthew chapter 25 also tells us that too. That also we will be divided between the sheep and the goats. On the right hand of Jesus, we have the sheep, and the left hand, we have the goats. This is the intention that God had from the beginning, really, that there would be a time of judgment for all of us, and then we'll be allocated into which of the two places we're going to go. There are only two options. You go to heaven or hell. But when we die now, waiting for that time of judgment, there is also a place that our souls will go in waiting, and that is what we talked about before, the Hadean realm, the place of torments or the place of paradise. But there's a little bit more to it. Let's look in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is this great passage here about the resurrection. In verse 28, Paul wrote, "When all things are made subject to him, then the Son himself will also be subject to him who put all things under him, that God may be all in all." So we're waiting for this time when everything will be brought together again and subjected to the Father in this context. Verse 44, talking about the body, that when it dies, it is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there's a spiritual body. So in this context, in this part, he's talking about how that we will be raised up, what our body will be like. And we don't really know what it's going to be like, except that it's going to be a spiritual body. But it is going to be our body. So what is planted in the graveyard will rise up. It will leave that place, and it will be reunited with our souls so that we are actually, again, a dual person like we have now, body and spirit. We will also have a spiritual body that will store our soul. I don't know how that works, but this is exactly what he's saying here. And we also see in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 that Jesus will come with his saints. He's bringing back the souls of those people who have departed. And when the resurrection happens, everyone will be reunited with their souls. They'll be raised from the dead. They will be walking around with spiritual bodies. Then look in verse 50. "Now I say this, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible is put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory?" So the point that he's making here is, well, part of this point that he's making here is that we will be raised, but we will be changed into something different. But we're still going to be raised from the dead. This was really confusing for me for a long time as a child, because I thought that we would, as soon as we died, our souls just went to heaven and our bodies were done with it. And that when Jesus was crucified and he was put in the earth, it made me wonder, I guess, well, when he came back to life, it was just his soul walking around. That's not true. His body actually left that tomb. And just as Jesus was raised from the dead, we also will be raised from the dead. Our bodies will be raised. That tells us something about us. Some people believe that we are a spirit living inside a physical body. That's true to an extent. But our bodies are also a part of who we are. That will also be raised. So now the two will become one again. We will be, however that's going to work, we're going to have a spiritual body, and then we're going to face the judgment. And the judgment will be whether or not we go to heaven or hell with that new spiritual body. This is where we need to understand the difference. The reason we don't go straight to heaven when we die is because we haven't been reunited with our bodies. They haven't been raised from the dead yet. At the end of time, when Jesus comes back, he's coming with a shout, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and all the dead will be raised. And we'll go into the sky and meet the Lord Jesus, and then we'll be with him forever. Now, is it wrong if someone says, my grandmother died and went to heaven? No, it's not a sin to say that. It's not technically correct, but there is certainly a lot of evidence that we can go and be with God when we die. That Jesus was in paradise, and in a sense, wherever God can be is a sense of heaven. So there is a sense in which it's a part of heaven, But it's technically not correct simply because we haven't received the resurrection yet and we haven't actually been assigned to heaven yet. But we will one day. This is what we look forward to. So as complicated as it is, and there are a lot of things that are going on, and I don't understand why it's as complicated as it is. I do know that we have a God who knows what He's doing. And when we come to the end of our lives, according to the parable in Luke chapter 16, if we're going to go to be in paradise or the bosom of Abraham, it seems like we're going to meet an angel to take us there. It also seems like when we're there, we're going to have recognition, memory, but no sorrow. How's that going to work? Got me. And then when we are raised from the dead, Hades gives us up, and we are then reunited with our spiritual bodies, and we are raised to be with Jesus forever. We're going to a place that never ends, where we have every need that we have ever had met. Any need that we have would be met. There's no more pain and no more suffering and no more sorrow. How is that going to happen? How is that going to work? I have no idea, but I trust in the God who said He's going to give it. And Jesus said when He went away that if I go away, I'll prepare a place for you, and I will come back for you. This is what we need to put our hearts into and our focus into. Yeah, these things are important. The difference between Hades and hell and torments and paradise, those are important ideas, and they should cause us to do what is right today. And if it doesn't, then we really need to take a serious look at what the Bible teaches. But more than anything, we need to ask the question, are you actually ready? Because death is coming, and we have no idea when. And we have it kind of in our heads nowadays that we're going to live a long life. And there are a lot of people in the graveyard who assumed they were going to continue to live a lot longer than they did. I would say probably most people, when they meet death, they thought it'd be too early. Are you ready? If you need help with that, we're here for you. We want to help. If you need to be baptized for the remission of your sins, please let us help you with that. If you need to study the Bible and learn how to do that, how to be saved, that's what we're here for. Or if you're a Christian, you haven't been living the way you should be living, make changes today so that you don't regret your future. If there's anything we can do to help you, please come as we stand and sing.